Have you ever felt like life's toughest moments were shaping you into someone stronger, someone more profound? What if every single challenge you faced was a hidden pathway to incredible personal growth, a journey your soul designed just for you? This isn't some fluffy spiritual bypassing. It's a lived truth for many. The hardest seasons of life often crack you open in ways that comfort never could. It sounds counterintuitive, but what if your greatest struggles are precisely where your most profound growth lies? Imagine viewing every setback not as a roadblock, but as a carefully crafted step on your soul's journey toward resilience and inner strength. The breakdowns? Maybe they're not detours. Maybe they're the map. We all face moments that feel insurmountable, where the weight of the world presses so hard it feels like you're going to disappear. But what if those moments are sacred ground? What if those very experiences are the soil from which your deepest strength and wisdom grow? This journey we're about to take together will gently untangle the myth that peace comes from avoiding pain. Instead, we'll explore how adversity itself can be the womb of transformation. Right now, you lie there. Maybe restless. Maybe reflective. Maybe just looking for something soft and real. Outside, life keeps moving, cars sighing through the night, that one owl that insists on hooting, your neighbor's porch light still glowing for some reason. But in here, in your mind, something quieter is taking root. Here's something you probably don't know. Research in post-traumatic growth suggests that people who endure major psychological struggle often report greater appreciation of life, more meaningful relationships, and a deeper sense of purpose, not despite the pain, but because of it. Surprising, isn't it? Before you settle in, feel free to like the video if it brought you a little peace, and if you'd like to join us again, we'd love to have you back. Subscribe when you're ready. No pressure, just rest. Share something if you feel like it. Let's slowly drift into tonight's quiet moments together. So, when pain arrives, and not just any pain, but the soul-shaking, spine-hollowing kind, you don't always know it's the beginning of something. You just know you want it to stop. Maybe your chest tightens, your breathing shifts, and everything ordinary begins to feel like it's dipped in static. But here's the wild part, that exact sensation is often the entry point. Not into despair, but into self-recovery. Into remembering yourself. Mainstream psychology has long discussed this under the lens of post-traumatic growth. A 2004 study by Tedeschi and Calhoun introduced 5 domains where people often grow following adversity: personal strength, appreciation for life, improved relationships, new possibilities, and spiritual change. And yes, even though your boss yelling at you or that breakup last fall might not feel spiritually transformational, your nervous system remembers. It rewires. Quietly, slowly, relentlessly. Here's a fun little twist. In ancient alchemy, the very first phase of transformation is called nigredo, the blackening. It's the symbolic death before rebirth, the moment everything falls apart to allow something truer to emerge. You might be there now. Or maybe you've been there longer than you care to admit. There remains considerable disagreement about whether suffering inherently leads to growth, or if it just increases your threshold for disappointment. Some scholars argue that growth depends more on meaning-making than on the pain itself. But here's what's not debated: something changes in you when you've walked through fire and come out with your soul intact. You remember the first time life made you drop to your knees? Maybe it was a loss. A betrayal. A diagnosis. A moment so disorienting that your old ways of coping couldn't carry you anymore. And yet, somewhere underneath the panic, there was a flicker. A presence. A strange clarity. You probably didn't notice it then. But it was the beginning of your becoming. Now, here's a quirky side note: elephants actually mourn their dead. They'll visit the bones of deceased members of their herd and touch them gently with their trunks. Not just once, repeatedly. And scientists believe this grief response is evidence of memory, connection, and emotional depth. In their own way, elephants know pain marks significance. And so do you. Your deepest pain, annoyingly enough, often shines a flashlight directly onto your deepest truths. Not immediately. Not without resistance. But eventually, if you allow it. Imagine you're hiking. Okay, you hate hiking. Let's say you're being dragged on a nature walk by your overly enthusiastic cousin. You veer off the marked path, classic mistake. Suddenly, you're not sure where the trail is. Your phone's dead. No reception. Everything's dense. But as you keep walking, not knowing exactly where you're going, you start noticing signs. A bent branch. A worn footprint. The light changing as you near a clearing. You're still lost, but you're not stuck. That's soul transformation. It's uncomfortable navigation. It's walking blind with moments of sudden knowing. You rarely get the full map, but you do get the next step. Now let's bring it back to you. What if you've been mistaking the beginning of your transformation for failure? What if you've interpreted the shaking of your old life as collapse, when it's actually a restructuring? What if the emotional overwhelm, the panic, the quiet grief, is just your soul rearranging itself to hold more truth? You'll notice that when you're finally too tired to pretend, something honest surfaces. That thing you've been pushing down, it starts rising. And it speaks clearly. Not in words, but in feelings. Heavy, inconvenient, but real. The trick? Don't shut the door too quickly. Let the pain speak its full sentence. Let it say what it needs to say. Then, you can ask it to step aside. Remember, emotional discomfort isn't a punishment. It's a message. A tap on the shoulder from the self you forgot you were. A weird little bonus for you. Did you know that humans are the only species that cry emotional tears? Sure, animals have tear ducts, but only humans leak emotion through their eyes. Some scientists think it's an evolutionary trait to signal distress to others. But in a spiritual sense, maybe it's the body's way of washing the soul. So now you're here, in this moment. Listening. Still. Safe. And something deep inside you, underneath the anxiety, underneath the fatigue, is remembering that pain has a place in the story. Not the whole story, but a powerful chapter. That quiet shift in your awareness, that's the first step. That's where growth begins. And with that small, brave noticing, we move forward. So now that you're standing, well, probably lying, at the starting line of this strange and sacred journey, let's talk about the identity you thought you had, and what happens when it starts to slip through your fingers. Because, eventually, it does. That version of you, the one who knew exactly how to answer the question, so what do you do, who wore that one emotional mask so well for so long, it begins to fray. You feel it first in subtle ways. Maybe you lose interest in things that used to light you up. Maybe your relationships feel hollow, like a party you showed up to but forgot why. Maybe you're just tired of your own performance. That's the moment the soul starts whispering, there's more. This kind of internal unraveling isn't a crisis of failure. It's an invitation. It's the first quiet knock on the door of your deeper self. But you usually don't greet it with open arms. No, you resist. You double down on routines. You keep pushing. You might even go shopping. Yes, the soul loves a breakdown, but it does not care if you just bought new throw pillows to avoid it. But still, it comes. Mainstream psychology calls this a self-concept crisis. Researchers like Carl Rogers talked about the real self versus the ideal self, and when the distance between those two becomes too wide, it creates emotional tension. The identity you've built starts clashing with the truth you've buried, and the result? Discomfort. Sometimes even despair. But, plot twist, it's also the portal. Here's something surprising. People who undergo major identity shifts, like changing careers after burnout, leaving long-term relationships, or surviving a near-death experience, often report feeling more like themselves afterward than they did before. Not because they discovered something new, but because they remembered something old. A long-standing controversy surrounds this. Are we discovering who we really are, or simply constructing new narratives that comfort us? Philosophers, psychologists, and probably your one deep friend who keeps buying journals have debated this for centuries. But here's the thing, either way, the process feels like truth. You begin to realize that most of your life, you've been responding to what others expected of you. Your career, your personality, your "I'm the one who always ______ identity. It was crafted in reaction to the world, not in alignment with your soul. And now? It doesn't fit. Like wearing someone else's coat. In August. This is the identity shedding phase. Uncomfortable, yes. But deeply clarifying. Just a quirky detail for you: in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a practice known as bardo, which refers to the transitional states between death and rebirth. But it's not just about physical death, it's about the in-between. The waiting. The place where one self ends and another hasn't quite begun. That's what identity loss feels like. A bardo. You're not who you were, but you're not yet who you're becoming. So, how do you survive it? First, you stop trying to fix it. Seriously. The more you try to get back to normal, the more you delay your becoming. Instead, you pause. You breathe. You notice the ways you've been shaped by the roles you've played. The achiever. The caregiver. The rebel. The quiet one. You name them, not to shame them, but to release their grip. Because here's the tender truth: your soul doesn't care about your title. Or your Instagram aesthetic. It only wants what's real. You may find yourself withdrawing. Not out of depression, but instinct. The chrysalis moment. Socializing feels like work. Small talk becomes unbearable. You crave something slower, deeper, quieter. Not because you're broken, but because you're shedding. And shedding is messy. You might cry. You might clean out your entire closet at 2 a.m. You might stare at the ceiling and ask, who even am I anymore? Congratulations. That's the work. That's the soul stitching something new out of the scraps of what no longer fits. An odd but true fact: octopuses can detach one of their arms when threatened, and it will keep moving independently to distract predators while the octopus escapes. Kind of like how you might send out a version of yourself, your performer, your people pleaser, just to survive a difficult space. But eventually, that version stops working. You get tired of splitting. You want your full self back. And that desire? It's the seed of rebirth. As your mind drifts deeper, another layer opens: the grief of losing parts of yourself that once kept you safe. That version of you, yes, even the performative one, helped you belong. Helped you survive. So when it starts to fall away, you might feel sadness. Even fear. Let it come. It means you're honoring your own evolution. You don't need to burn down your whole life, although if you've already done that, no judgment. Scorched earth is an aesthetic. But you do need to become honest about what no longer aligns. And that honesty? It's both an ending and a beginning. There's a word in Japanese, ma. It means the space between. It's the silence in music, the pause between breaths, the emptiness that holds potential. That's where you are when identity unravels. In the ma. Not quite arrived, no longer departing. And in that space, something remarkable starts to grow: permission. Permission to choose again. To build differently. To belong to yourself. The identity crisis doesn't destroy you. It empties you just enough so your soul can whisper, this. This is who you really are. So tonight, as you lie there, maybe unsure, maybe exhausted, maybe just gently curious, let this be your moment of ma. Of the in-between. Of not rushing to fill the void, but letting the silence deepen. Let the roles fall away like leaves in autumn. You don't need to know who you're becoming. You only need to keep listening. And trust that what's falling apart isn't taking you down, it's setting you free. And now that you've stepped into the foggy space of identity unraveling, where everything familiar gets blurry, something curious starts to happen. Little sparks. Uncomfortable ones. Emotional triggers. The things that make your jaw clench, your chest tighten, or your entire nervous system go into full DEFCON 1 mode because someone said that word or gave you that look. You know the feeling. A friend casually mentions something you're secretly insecure about. Your partner forgets to text back, and suddenly you're spiraling into abandonment mode. Or your boss gives you feedback, and it lights up every childhood wound like a Christmas tree. Yep. Those moments. They're not just psychological reactions. They're breadcrumbs on your soul's trail. Triggers are annoying, yes. But they're also strangely precise. They point exactly to the places inside you that haven't fully healed yet. Think of them like emotional pressure points. When one gets pressed, it hurts, but also reveals exactly where your energy, attention, and care are needed most. From a psychological standpoint, triggers are often tied to implicit memory, the unconscious storage of emotional experiences that shape how you respond to the present. The body remembers what the mind may not. Trauma researcher Bessel van der Kolk famously said, "The body keeps the score," and he wasn't joking. You think you're mad at the barista for spelling your name wrong, but your nervous system might be reacting to a 15-year-old memory of not feeling seen. But wait, here's a curious twist. Dolphins have been observed using coral to self-medicate. They deliberately rub against specific types of coral that have antibacterial properties. Wild, right? They instinctively know where the hurt is and what it needs. In a weirdly poetic way, your soul is doing the same thing. It brings you into situations that rub you the wrong way, so you can learn how to heal them. The issue has sparked significant intellectual debate. Are emotional triggers meant to be resolved, or simply managed? Some schools of thought treat them as pathologies to eliminate. Others view them as invitations to integrate parts of the self that have been exiled. Either way, you're not broken for having them. You're alive. And aware. Think about the last time you were emotionally triggered. Not just annoyed, but activated. Like something in your brain slammed a big red "do not proceed" button and flooded you with heat, tension, and irrational thoughts. It's overwhelming, yes. But it's also a flashlight. Your inner world just showed you exactly where it still needs your attention. Instead of trying to suppress the reaction, or shame yourself for having it, you can take a step back and ask, what part of me feels unsafe right now? Because beneath every trigger is a vulnerable part of you asking to be seen. Maybe it's your inner child. Maybe it's your exhausted adult self who's just trying to keep everything together. There's something oddly empowering about being able to name your own reactions. Ah, that's my fear of rejection. Or, there's my old belief that I always have to prove myself. That awareness doesn't erase the feeling, but it softens it. It makes space for something kinder. You might find this surprising. In the 1970s, psychologist John Bowlby, famous for attachment theory, found that emotional regulation in adulthood is heavily influenced by early childhood bonds. Which means your current triggers might be echoing attachment wounds from decades ago. The good news? Your brain is neuroplastic. Meaning, those old pathways aren't permanent. They're flexible. Like emotional Play-Doh. As your soul grows, it doesn't make you immune to being triggered, it just changes your response to it. Instead of spiraling, you begin to pause. You get curious. You notice your body tensing, your heart racing, and you gently go, okay. Something's being poked here. Let's not run. Let's lean in. A little surprise for you, in some therapeutic circles, triggers are reframed as trailheads. The beginning of a journey inward. The start of a conversation with your inner world. A spark that says, go here. This matters. You may also start noticing patterns. Maybe certain types of people trigger you, authority figures, passive-aggressive colleagues, needy friends. These aren't just random annoyances. They often mirror parts of yourself you've disowned. That's the real kicker. What triggers you might be the shadow side of who you are. Jungian psychology calls this projection. It's when you cast parts of your unconscious self onto others. And until you become aware of it, you'll keep running into versions of yourself in other people, disguised as irritation. Not fun. But endlessly informative. Let's say you get triggered by someone who's too loud, too much, too emotional. That reaction could point to a part of you that's been silenced. Or maybe someone's self-confidence activates your deep insecurities. Again, trailheads. They're not judging you. They're guiding you. So, instead of asking, why is this person so awful? Try this one. What is this reaction teaching me about me? Not to let people off the hook, but to bring the focus back to your own growth. As your night stretches on and your breath slows, let that truth settle in. The next time your chest tightens, your thoughts race, and your inner monologue says, nope, we're not doing this, pause. That's not just a stress response. It's a soul signal. One that says, there's a wound here. Pay attention. It's okay to flinch. It's okay to cry. It's even okay to need to leave the room. But the healing begins when you return, not to the person who triggered you, but to the part of you that reacted. There's such deep tenderness in that kind of self-inquiry. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Because every time you face a trigger with compassion, you're doing more than surviving, you're rewriting your internal story. You're giving your soul new language. Softer pages. Gentler tones. And slowly, the things that once shattered you become signposts. Markers on the path. Not threats, but teachers. So the next time your nervous system screams, retreat. Maybe, just maybe, you can whisper back, I hear you. But let's walk through this together. That gentle shift in response? It's everything. When you're doing all this inner work, facing your identity unraveling, sitting with your emotional triggers, trying not to throw your phone across the room during one more mindfulness reel, something else inevitably shows up. Control. Or rather, the loss of it. It's funny how tightly we cling to control when we're uncomfortable. You start making lists. You organize your apps. You overplan your weekend. You micromanage your own healing, as if you can schedule your soul's transformation between errands and iced coffee. But underneath that obsessive management is usually fear. Fear of falling apart. Fear of what might happen if you actually let go. And yet, when control finally slips through your fingers, something strange happens. Clarity creeps in. It doesn't barge through like a marching band. It tiptoes in, softly. In the silence that follows surrender, your inner knowing starts whispering things you've been too busy, or too scared, to hear. Let's get psychological for a moment. Psychologists call this cognitive restructuring. It's when your brain begins to reorganize its beliefs and thought patterns, usually after a jolt, like loss, trauma, or major life change. But the restructuring doesn't happen when you're in full control mode. It begins after, when you're too exhausted to pretend you've got it all figured out. You know that moment when you finally stop fighting the situation? You're not cheering for it, but you just stop. And weirdly, there's relief. There's a loosening. It's like dropping a bag you didn't realize you were carrying. You might find this unexpected. During the Apollo 13 mission, when the spacecraft suffered a massive malfunction, the astronauts had to relinquish their original flight plan completely. Instead of pushing forward with the mission, they swung around the moon in a wide arc to use its gravity to slingshot back to Earth. That wasn't the plan. But surrendering the mission saved their lives. Sometimes, your soul does the same. It slingshots you into a completely different trajectory when the path you thought you needed falls apart. Not because you failed, but because you had to reroute to survive. A long-standing debate surrounds whether surrender is passive resignation or conscious action. Some spiritual teachers say surrender is an act of trust, a dynamic, awake choice to allow rather than control. Others argue it's a byproduct of collapse, not a virtue. But you'll feel the difference. Resignation feels like giving up. It's heavy. Numb. Surrender, on the other hand, feels oddly spacious. Like stepping into the unknown with your eyes open, even if you're trembling. Maybe you felt it before, that sudden peace that comes right after you stop trying to force an outcome. You were clenching, worrying, problem-solving to death, and then, something inside you said, no more. You let go. And it wasn't defeat. It was freedom. That's the paradox of spiritual growth. The more you loosen your grip, the more insight flows in. Just a quirky tidbit: in Japanese art, there's a technique called noten, which emphasizes the relationship between light and dark spaces. Artists study the contrast not by focusing on what to draw, but on what not to draw. In the same way, your clarity often arises not from adding more, but from releasing what doesn't need to be held. When life slips out of your carefully arranged plans, when people leave, jobs disappear, dreams change, you might panic at first. That's normal. You start asking, what do I do now? But eventually, if you stay with it long enough, that question softens. It becomes, who am I without all of this? And that question? That's your turning point. The truth is, most of us build our lives around predictability. Schedules. Rules. Roles. But soul growth doesn't live there. It lives in the chaos between the systems. It thrives in the moments when nothing goes to plan, and you're forced to ask deeper questions. You don't need to know what's next. You just need to know how to be in the unknown without trying to conquer it. It sounds simple. It's not. But it is beautiful. Here's something strange and kind of magical. In many indigenous traditions, illness or struggle is seen as a kind of spiritual calling, a way the soul gets your attention when you've strayed from your path. You don't power through it. You listen to it. You follow it like a teacher. A disruptive, inconvenient, life-altering teacher. And when you stop trying to fix everything, you start to notice things you couldn't see before. The way your body whispers before it screams. The patterns in your relationships. The hidden resentment buried under your need to be the strong one. The truth under the noise. Letting go of control isn't about doing nothing. It's about trusting something beyond what you can see. Something older. Wiser. Not necessarily more pleasant, but more aligned. And yes, your ego will hate it. It'll scream, but if we don't plan it all out, everything will fall apart. And to be fair, some things will. But maybe they needed to. Maybe what falls apart when you surrender is the stuff you were never meant to carry forward anyway. That shift, losing control, then finding clarity, isn't linear. It happens in cycles. 1 minute you're calm. The next you're frantically reorganizing your email folders to feel functional. It's okay. Surrender is not a one-time event. It's a practice. A daily, sometimes hourly, return to your center. Tonight, if your mind is spinning, if you're desperately trying to figure everything out, pause. Take one full breath. Let your shoulders drop. You don't have to know the outcome. You don't have to have the answer. You only have to trust the timing. And allow the unfolding. Remember, clarity doesn't always arrive in words. Sometimes it's a feeling. A knowing. A single moment of deep breath that whispers, I don't need to push anymore. Let that be enough, for now. Now that surrender has opened a little breathing space, guess what steps forward next? Other people. Of course. Because just when you think you're getting grounded again, bam, your boss forgets your name, your partner pushes every button you've got, or your parent drops a comment so subtly judgmental you almost admire the craftsmanship. Welcome to the next terrain on the soul's journey, difficult relationships. You know the kind. The ones that force you to question everything from your boundaries to your birth chart. The people who don't just irritate you, they reflect you. The ones who hold up an emotional mirror so polished, you see things you'd rather ignore. It's uncomfortable. But it's also profound. Because relationships, especially the complicated ones, are often the fastest route to self-discovery. They reveal your triggers, your patterns, your blind spots. And whether it's romantic, platonic, familial, or Karen from accounting, every dynamic has the potential to be a spiritual classroom. In mainstream psychology, this idea comes alive through attachment theory. Originally developed by John Bowlby and expanded by Mary Ainsworth, attachment theory explores how early childhood bonding shapes adult relationships. Secure, avoidant, anxious, disorganized, these patterns don't just influence who you date. They influence how you argue, how you apologize, how you hold love, or push it away. So, if someone in your life constantly makes you feel unseen, unsafe, or unworthy, you might not just be reacting to them. You could be re-experiencing old relational wounds that never got a proper ending. But here's a fun little twist. In some Eastern traditions, it's believed that the soul chooses its most important relationships before birth. Not just the lovely, soulmate ones, but also the challenging, triggering, deeply uncomfortable ones. Yes, even your ex. Especially your ex. These connections, they say, are here to teach us something. To evolve us. There remains considerable disagreement about whether these soul contracts are metaphorical or literal, but the result is often the same. The toughest relationships reveal the deepest truths. Ever notice how certain people just get under your skin? It's usually not random. Maybe they echo a parent's emotional tone. Or a bully from your past. Or your own inner critic, personified and walking around in khakis. These are called relational templates, your brain's default settings for how closeness and conflict are handled. And difficult relationships shake those templates like a snow globe. They make you feel like you're regressing. But often, you're actually being called to respond in a new way. Not from the old wound, but from a more conscious, centered place. Let's say you always feel like you're giving more than you receive. That dynamic doesn't just show up in one relationship, it follows you. Until, finally, you notice it. You pause. You say, hey, maybe I don't have to earn love by overgiving. That's single realization. That's evolution. A little known but fascinating fact, in conflict, your heart rate often spikes above 100 BPM, which impairs your ability to reason logically. That's why arguments escalate so fast. You're not just fighting, you're flooded. And when flooded, your nervous system takes over. You react, defend, withdraw. But awareness changes everything. Next time, maybe you pause. Maybe you breathe. Maybe you choose a response instead of a reflex. Because that's what soul growth through relationship really means. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming present. And the more present you are, the more you see the patterns clearly. That friend who constantly criticizes you for your own good? They might be echoing a parent's voice you internalized. That romantic partner who ghosts every time things get real? They might be mirroring your own discomfort with true vulnerability. The uncomfortable truth? The people who challenge us the most often reflect something inside us. Not because we deserve mistreatment, but because those interactions shine a light on the parts of ourselves still operating from fear, survival, or self-abandonment. You might find this fascinating. In Kabbalistic mysticism, the concept of a tikkun suggests that the soul returns to this life to correct specific imbalances, often through human relationship. The person who frustrates you the most? They might actually be your greatest opportunity for soul repair. Not because they're right, but because they reveal where you still have work to do. And here's the nuance. This doesn't mean you should stay in toxic situations for growth. You're not a cosmic punching bag. Sometimes, the lesson is to leave. Sometimes the growth comes from saying no, setting boundaries, or walking away without guilt. But sometimes, the work is to stay and stay conscious. To speak differently. To own your part. To stop trying to win, and start trying to understand. Especially when it's hard. Think of difficult relationships as emotional dojos. You don't get stronger by avoiding the tension. You get stronger by learning how to stay present within it. Not to win. Not to dominate. But to understand what's rising in you. That's the soul work. Just a quirky detail to throw in, bonobos, one of our closest primate relatives, resolve social tension not by fighting, but by engaging in affectionate behavior. Essentially, they override conflict with connection. Not exactly how your last argument at Thanksgiving went, but an interesting concept, no? So tonight, think about the person who gets under your skin the most. Not to obsess over them, but to reflect. What part of you do they challenge? What pattern do they reveal? Where are you still giving your power away, or hiding, or overcompensating? These relationships, as exhausting as they can be, are sacred mirrors. They show you how far you've come, and where you're still unfolding. And when you see them that way, even just a little, the irritation softens. The anger quiets. The story shifts. Because maybe that person isn't just your antagonist. Maybe they're your teacher. So after dancing with the complicated reflections of other people, some mirrors, some magnifying glasses, you may find yourself somewhere you didn't expect to end up. Alone. And not just the cozy kind of alone where you binge watch an entire series with a weighted blanket and a smug sense of autonomy. No, this is the kind of loneliness that presses against your chest. The kind that feels like a quiet ache behind your ribs. A sense that no one quite sees you. That even surrounded by people, you are somehow still adrift. But don't turn away from this space too quickly. Because loneliness, as uncomfortable as it is, often marks the edge of something sacred. This emptiness? It's not a punishment. It's a preparation. Loneliness is the space before awakening. Psychology offers a lot of theories about loneliness, some rooted in social connection, others in evolutionary survival. But more recent research in existential psychology frames loneliness as a spiritual signal. A call inward. A moment when the external world no longer satisfies your deeper needs, and your soul starts craving something more, something real, something rooted, something new. This is where the transformation starts to deepen. You might feel like you're withdrawing from people, pulling away from noise, or just feeling misunderstood by everyone around you. It's not necessarily depression. It might be something subtler, a spiritual molting. The old layers of identity, community, and external validation no longer fit. You're in the in-between again. That ma space we mentioned before, the sacred pause. Here's an odd but beautiful insight. In a 2021 study on solitude and creativity, researchers found that temporary social isolation can lead to increased introspection, self-reconnection, and even bursts of insight. But only when the solitude is chosen, not imposed. The difference lies in whether you resist the loneliness, or lean into it. And that's the hard part, isn't it? Because loneliness can make you feel like something's wrong with you. You scroll through social media, see curated joy everywhere, and start to wonder, did I miss something? Why am I here, alone, while everyone else seems fine? But here's a strange comfort. Nearly every major spiritual awakening in history, personal or mythic, starts in isolation. Buddha under the tree. Jesus in the desert. Even your nervous breakdown in the parking lot counts. When the world goes quiet, the soul speaks louder. A long-standing controversy surrounds the function of loneliness. Is it purely social deprivation, or is it a developmental necessity? Some theories suggest that loneliness is the byproduct of modern disconnection. Others argue it's a liminal rite of passage, required for genuine transformation. But you know what it feels like. And that's what matters. In this space, you may begin to grieve things you didn't realize you'd lost, identities, friendships, even imagined futures. That's not weakness. That's emotional integration. You're finally making contact with parts of yourself that had been muffled by noise and distraction. Here's a little surprise for you. In traditional Japanese forest therapy, Shinrin-yoku, solitude in nature is seen as medicinal. Not just peaceful, healing. Being alone among trees, without the push-pull of human energy, resets your nervous system. The Japanese government even prescribes it as part of some public health programs. Imagine that, loneliness, reframed as sacred stillness. Now, of course, loneliness can tip into despair. If you feel lost in it for too long, don't hesitate to reach out. Connection matters. You weren't meant to do everything alone. But the point here isn't to avoid being alone, it's to understand it. Because there's something within loneliness that's incredibly honest. It strips away the illusions of who you think you need to be. It shows you the difference between being liked and being known. It reveals the people who are there for your light, and the ones who only liked the glow. And once you pass through that space, you change. You become more discerning with your energy. More honest in your interactions. You stop performing. You start aligning. Loneliness makes you hungry for realness, and unwilling to settle for less. You might find this curious. Some people experience a state psychologists call beautiful loneliness. It's when solitude brings a kind of quiet joy, a feeling of wholeness that doesn't depend on others. It's rare. It usually comes after the discomfort has burned away the fear. But it's real. And it's yours, if you choose it. So tonight, if the silence around you feels heavy, if you're scrolling through this audio space looking for something to fill the void, pause. Just for a second. What if this isn't emptiness? What if this is incubation? What if this still, strange aloneness is the soul's version of a dark room, where new visions develop slowly, quietly, away from the glare? You're not broken for being in this space. You're ripening. Let yourself be here. Let the stillness do its work. Let the loneliness become a companion, not a curse. It might be holding open the door to your next level of clarity, creativity, and connection, not just with others, but with yourself. You're not behind. You're not lost. You're just alone, for now. And in this space, something tender and ancient and true is coming alive in you. So breathe deep. Let the silence stay a little longer. It's not empty. It's sacred. So you've been walking through the solitude, letting the silence settle. You're not rushing, you're not resisting, just breathing in the discomfort and watching the pieces rearrange themselves. And just when you think you've got a small grip on things again, it happens. The crash. Burnout. Not the caffeine can't fix this kind. The deep kind. The kind that seeps into your bones and whispers, you can't keep going like this. It's physical, emotional, spiritual exhaustion all tangled together in one big, heavy sigh. And you try to push through, of course. You rally. You tell yourself it's just a bad week, maybe you just need more sleep, a better planner, a weekend away. But deep down, you know. This isn't surface level stress. This is soul deep depletion. And it's not a failure. It's a message. Because burnout, especially this kind, doesn't just ask you to slow down. It asks you to reconsider everything. Who you're living for. What you're chasing. Whether your ladder is even leaning against the right wall. Psychologists Christina Maslach and Michael Leiter, experts on burnout, define it not just as exhaustion, but as disconnection from meaning. It's not just that you're tired. It's that you're tired and it's not worth it anymore. That's when you know you've crossed from mere overwork into the soul's alarm system. Burnout strips things bare. It forces a reckoning. And weirdly enough, that's where the wisdom begins. You may find this interesting. In Finnish culture, there's a term called kalsarikanit, literally, drinking at home in your underwear with no intention of going out. It's not about burnout exactly, but it speaks to something honest, the desire to stop performing. To drop the act. To return to the self in its raw, unedited form. Burnout, in its own inconvenient way, demands this return. A long-standing philosophical debate lingers here. Is burnout a personal failing, or a systemic problem? Some say it's a symptom of capitalism's demand for constant productivity. Others say it's the price of ignoring our limits. In truth, it's likely both. You're not broken for being burned out. You're responding normally to a culture that glorifies overfunctioning and shames stillness. And when you're in it, you feel like a ghost version of yourself. You wake up tired. You resent tasks you used to love. Your emotions flatten, or swing wildly. You fantasize about quitting everything, moving to a cabin in the woods, and talking to moss for company. Not the worst plan, honestly. But underneath the fatigue, something real is trying to surface. Burnout is your soul saying, what we've been doing is no longer aligned. You can't outrun it. But you can listen to it. And here's a fun twist. Studies show that burnout recovery often involves 3 essential things: rest, reconnection with values, and a reshaping of identity. So it's not just about sleep. It's about meaning. You heal not just by resting, but by realigning. And that might look like small, unexpected changes. Saying no when you used to say yes. Quitting something that used to define you. Spending time with people who don't need you to be on. Making things with your hands. Gardening. Painting. Sitting in the sun for no reason other than it feels good. You might find this surprising. Many people report that their most honest creative breakthroughs happen after burnout. Not during the climb, but after the crash. It's like your soul finally has enough space to speak freely, without the noise of performance or productivity. And that voice? It starts whispering things you didn't expect. You don't want that job anymore. That goal wasn't really yours. You're allowed to change. It's disorienting. Because burnout doesn't just take your energy, it takes your narrative. You lose the story that once fueled you. But that loss? It's a doorway. Because once the old identity has burned down, you get to ask, what kind of life would actually feel nourishing? And that question changes everything. You may not have the answers yet. That's okay. Most people don't. Burnout isn't solved with a new planner or a better diet. It's healed by returning to what makes you feel human again. Maybe that's walking barefoot in grass. Maybe it's listening to music you loved before the world told you who to be. Maybe it's just permission to stop. Just a quirky detail. In Ayurveda, the ancient Indian system of medicine, burnout is associated with an imbalance of the Pitta dasha, fire energy. When Pitta burns too intensely, it scorches everything, including your capacity for joy. The remedy? Cooling. Soothing. Slowing. And oddly enough, doing less. Tonight, as you lie in that gentle stillness, maybe a little foggy, maybe completely fried, know this: burnout is not your fault. But it is your responsibility to respond to it with compassion. You are not lazy. You are not weak. You are waking up to the truth that constant output isn't the same as real purpose. And when the exhaustion eventually fades, you'll find something softer underneath. A new rhythm. A quieter motivation. A version of you that no longer wants to prove anything, just be. So rest, not just to recharge, but to remember. You are allowed to outgrow the life that burned you out. Once you've stared down burnout, soul-scorching, system-resetting burnout, you may feel a little raw. A little unsure. You've let go of what no longer fits, but you haven't quite stepped into what's next. And that's when fear shows up. Of course it does. Because fear loves the in-between. It thrives in uncertainty. And here's the thing, it doesn't always come in waving its arms or howling in your face. Sometimes, fear wears a suit. It sounds reasonable. It whispers things like, let's not do anything drastic. Or, what if this doesn't work? Or even worse, you're not ready. But here's the radical shift. What if fear isn't your enemy? What if fear is your compass? That's right, the very thing you've been taught to avoid might actually be pointing you toward the most important, hidden truths of your life. Not away from them. Mainstream psychology backs this up with exposure theory. It shows that when people face their fears in gradual, controlled ways, the fear response actually weakens. Your brain learns, I thought this would kill me. It didn't. Maybe I'm okay. Fear loses its power when you move through it. Now, don't get me wrong, some fears are protective. If you're about to pet a wild bear or invest your life savings in a pyramid scheme, please listen to your fear. It's doing its job. But the fears that show up when you think about quitting that job, ending that relationship, starting that passion project, those are different. Those are the fears that rise because something inside you is waking up. A weird little bonus: baby goats experience fear just like humans, but instead of freezing, they faint. It's called myotonia congenita, and while it's technically a muscular quirk, it's been used metaphorically to talk about how humans sometimes faint emotionally when overwhelmed. We check out. Go numb. Scroll, snack, shop. Anything but feel. You might do that too. Not because you're weak, but because fear makes you want to protect yourself from the unknown. Totally human. But if you're always fainting, always freezing, always backing away, you miss the transformation that's waiting just past the discomfort. There's a big, juicy philosophical debate about this. Is fear a tool for survival only, or can it also be a teacher? Stoics believed fear must be mastered through logic. Mystics saw it as a gateway to surrender. Neuroscientists map it in the amygdala. And yet, artists, writers, and travelers will tell you the same thing. When fear shows up, something meaningful is often right behind it. What if you started to treat fear as information, not an instruction? Instead of hearing, stop, you hear, look here. Instead of interpreting discomfort as danger, you interpret it as data. Because you know what's actually dangerous? Ignoring your own longing. Fear shows up most fiercely when you stand near the edges of your next evolution. You'll feel it when you're about to speak your truth, or tell someone no, or walk away from something that looks good on paper but feels wrong in your bones. That full body hesitation? That racing heart? That's your internal system going, whoa. This matters. You might find this surprising. Fear and excitement are nearly identical in the body. Same heart rate, same adrenaline, same jittery sensation. The only difference? The story you attach to it. Am I terrified? Or thrilled? The nervous system doesn't know. You decide. That's why people like skydivers, performers, and public speakers often say, "I was so scared. But then I jumped anyway." Not because they got rid of the fear, but because they redefined it. That's the move. You don't wait until fear is gone. You go with it. In fact, the most soulful decisions often come wrapped in fear. You know the ones. The leap to leave. The vulnerable confession. The, "I don't know where this is going, but I can't stay here" moment. Those are crossroads moments. They demand that you move through, not around. Just a quirky fact, studies show that writing about your fears, literally putting them on paper, activates different regions of the brain than just thinking about them. This helps reduce emotional intensity and increase clarity. So next time you're scared, don't just feel it. Write it down. Let your fear explain itself. You might be surprised how much of it is recycled anxiety from 5 life chapters ago. You can also ask your fear questions. Weird, I know. But effective. Try. What are you trying to protect me from? What would happen if I did the thing anyway? Is this fear from the present, or the past? And listen. Not to obey, but to understand. Because fear doesn't vanish just because you're growing. Sometimes it increases, because your inner world knows something's about to shift. Fear is part of your evolution. It's not the villain. It's the threshold. Tonight, as you lie still in the quiet and let your breath find its rhythm, check in with yourself. What are you scared of right now? And underneath that, what might you be longing for? What dream, boundary, truth, or desire lives on the other side of your fear? You don't have to leap tonight. But you can notice. You can take one breath into that fear. Just enough to say, "I see you." And slowly, gently, you'll start to realize, you're not here to stay small. You're here to expand. Even if your voice shakes. Even if your hands tremble. Even if you have no idea where it leads. So take the next step. With fear, not without it. By now, you've met fear, not as a wall, but as a signpost. And maybe, just maybe, you're realizing that everything you thought was there to block you, was actually there to direct you. Which brings us to another place on this soul path. A place you don't like visiting. A place you've probably judged yourself for being too many times. Failure. Ugh, right? That word still stings. It tastes like regret and shame and awkward job interviews. But failure, soul failure, isn't just about mistakes. It's about collapse. The bottom dropping out of something you thought would hold. It's the business that didn't work. The relationship that unraveled. The dream that dissolved after years of effort. And when failure arrives, it rarely knocks. It breaks in. It's loud. It leaves you doubting everything, including your worth. But hold on, don't pull the covers over your head just yet. Because failure, when it's met with presence, becomes something wildly transformational. Not a punishment. A portal. Mainstream psychology has studied this in detail. Carol Dweck, the researcher behind the concept of growth mindset, showed that people who view failure as a learning opportunity develop stronger resilience, better problem-solving skills, and higher long-term achievement. But here's the thing, the shift doesn't happen during the failure. It happens after, when the dust settles and the self-reflection begins. Here's a strange but brilliant twist. In Japanese culture, there's a practice called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. Instead of hiding the cracks, they highlight them, celebrating the object's history, not masking it. The philosophy? What's been broken and repaired is more beautiful than what was never broken at all. Imagine treating your life like that. Imagine seeing your failure not as a scar to conceal, but a vein of gold running through your story. Of course, there remains considerable disagreement about how much failure is healthy. Some psychologists argue that repeated failure can lead to learned helplessness, a state where you stop trying altogether. Others say it's about context, whether support, reflection, and meaning are present during the recovery. The takeaway? Failure alone doesn't grow you. What you do with it does. Think back to a moment you felt you'd failed. Maybe you lost something. Maybe you were rejected. Maybe you gave it everything and it still wasn't enough. In that moment, you probably questioned your value. But now, looking back, can you see what shifted? Maybe you found strength you didn't know you had. Maybe you discovered a different path, one that fits better than what you were chasing before. Maybe you just finally let go of what was never really yours. You might find this surprising. A 2018 study found that people who experienced early career failures in science, grants rejected, papers unpublished, were more likely to later produce hit work, compared to those with early success. Why? Because failure made them refine, rethink, and reapproach with sharper clarity. There's power in the crumble. Because when the dream shatters, what's left is only the truth. And truth, inconvenient as it is the raw material of soul growth. Here's what failure actually does. It disrupts your narrative. You were telling yourself one story, I'm on the right path, I've got this figured out, and then, nope. Suddenly, the story no longer works. And in that disorientation, a crack opens up. That crack is where new questions come in. What really matters to me? What have I been avoiding? If this door closed, what other door might I finally be brave enough to try? That's not delusion. That's redesign. Just a quirky tidbit, lobsters grow by molting. When they outgrow their current shell, they shed it, leaving them soft and vulnerable until a new one forms. It's risky. They're exposed. But without the molt, they can't grow. Sound familiar? Your soul does the same. Failure is the molt. Uncomfortable. Exposing. But necessary for expansion. You might also notice something else happening during failure. Humility returns. Not the performative kind. The real kind. The kind that says, I don't know. I need help. I need time. I need to begin again. And from that space, something wiser begins to speak. There's a voice that only failure can reveal. It's quieter than your ego. Slower than your goals. But so much more honest. It says things like, you were chasing someone else's dream. You were operating from fear, not purpose. You weren't listening to your gut. Painful truths. But freeing ones. And if you let them land, without judgment, you begin to build a new narrative. One that's based on inner alignment, not outer approval. Tonight, maybe take a breath and ask yourself gently, what's one thing I thought I failed at, that might have actually been a redirection? You don't need to reframe everything into a silver lining. Some things are just hard. But within the ashes, there's always a flicker. A glint. A next breath. Failure doesn't mean you're off path. Sometimes, it means you're finally on it. So, you've failed gloriously. Or quietly. Or painfully. You've fallen flat, curled into a mental ball, and maybe had a few, what the hell is even the point, days. And somewhere in the silence after that collapse, if you listened closely, something began to stir. Not in your mind. In your body. Because here's the next layer of your soul's journey, learning that growth doesn't just happen in your mind or your heart or your Instagram-ready spiritual revelations. It happens in your body first. That tightness in your chest when you ignore your truth. That exhaustion that won't go away no matter how many green juices you drink. That chronic ache that seems to flare up only when you're stressed. Yeah. That's not just stress. That's the body trying to speak in the only language it knows, sensation. Mainstream psychology is starting to catch up to what somatic therapists and trauma workers have been saying for years. Your body stores your story. Every unresolved emotion, every suppressed truth, every bypassed breakdown, it doesn't just disappear. It gets filed into your nervous system like emotional muscle memory. Bessel van der Kolk, yes, him again, he's basically the Beyoncé of trauma research, puts it simply, the body keeps the score. And that score isn't just about trauma, it's about truth. Your body knows when something's off, even when your brain is busy rationalizing it away. So when you ignore what you feel, your body doesn't forget. It holds on until you're ready to listen. You might find this unexpected. Some cultures believe the body stores specific emotions in specific organs. In traditional Chinese medicine, grief is stored in the lungs. Anger in the liver. Fear in the kidneys. Whether or not that's your framework, there's something poetic, and incredibly human, about the idea that our pain lives somewhere in us, not just as memory, but as presence. There's a long-standing debate in clinical circles about the effectiveness of talk therapy alone in healing deep-rooted emotional pain. While verbal processing is powerful, more and more research shows that somatic work, body-based therapies like breathwork, yoga, and EMDR, can reach places the conscious mind can't access. Why? Because some pain didn't happen in words. It happened in silence. In the body. So that's where it needs to be healed. Here's a quirky detail for you. Octopuses have no bones, but they can remember pain in specific limbs even after an arm has been removed. Scientists call it limb-specific memory. It's as if even in separation, the body remembers. Sound familiar? You've probably done the same, held pain in parts of your body long after the experience ended. Headaches that come every time you feel unsupported. Shoulder tension after people-pleasing. Gut issues from swallowing too much truth. Your body is not betraying you. It's trying to free you. And the more you tune into it, not just during breakdowns, but in everyday life, the more fluent you become in your soul's physical language. That pit in your stomach when you're about to say yes to something you don't want to do? That's your intuition saying no. That heaviness in your chest after a conversation that felt just a little off? That's a boundary being crossed. But we've been trained to override those signals. To be polite. To be productive. To push through. And over time, we start to believe that disconnection from our bodies is normal. Until something breaks. Until the whispers become screams. So what's the path back? Slow reconnection. Not fixing. Not judging. Just noticing. What happens in your body when you speak your truth? When you lie? When you rest? When you work? When you pretend? Your body is a brilliant, moody narrator. It doesn't always use logic, but it always tells the truth. And when you start to follow those cues, when you stop gaslighting your own system, you begin to find a rhythm again. A kind of embodied alignment. You stop asking the world for permission to rest, to cry, to pause, to rage. You give it to yourself. You might find this fascinating. The vagus nerve, one of the longest nerves in the body, plays a crucial role in regulating your stress response. Practices like deep breathing, humming, or even singing activate it, helping calm your system and shift you into a more grounded state. In other words, healing isn't always a big dramatic release. Sometimes it's as simple as exhaling with intention. Here's a gentle reframe: your body is not a problem to solve. It's a compass, a diary, a weather system. And it's allowed to have storms. When you learn to read its cues, you stop outsourcing your decisions. You begin to trust that weird heaviness, that quiet thrill, that random urge to rest or move or stretch or cry. That's not flakiness. That's wisdom. So tonight, as you lie still, scan your body, not to judge it, but to meet it. What's tight? What's soft? What feels like it's trying to get your attention? And ask yourself, gently, without pressure, what would it feel like to listen? Not fix. Not force. Just listen. Because maybe, just maybe, the body is where your soul lives when it runs out of words. So now you've tuned in. To your breath, your belly, your bones. You've stopped bypassing your body's quiet wisdom, and suddenly, things feel different. Not all are better. Not wrapped in a bow. But real. Like you're finally back in the same room as yourself. And once that reconnection begins, body, heart, soul, you start hearing something else. Faint at first. Subtle. Like a whisper under all the noise. Your intuition. Not your anxiety, not your people-pleasing, not your Pinterest board of ideal life plans, but the real, raw voice of you, humming underneath it all like a secret signal. Let's be honest, intuition has gotten a bit of a reputation. Somewhere between mysticism and mood ring science, it's often dismissed as too woo for serious conversations. But psychologists have studied intuition for decades. And here's what they've found: intuition is not magic. It's pattern recognition at a subconscious level. Your brain picks up on clues faster than your conscious mind can articulate. So when you feel a gut sense about someone, or you suddenly know what you need without knowing why, that's not random. That's internal data, processed at lightning speed, rising to the surface in the form of instinct. You might find this surprising. In a 2016 study, researchers found that people who listened to their gut instincts in high-stakes decisions performed better than those who relied purely on analysis. Not always, but often enough to show your inner knowing deserves a seat at the table. But here's the challenge: intuition speaks softly. Anxiety yells. Fear hijacks the mic, logic draws a flowchart. But intuition? It usually slips in when you're quiet. When you're still. When you're not trying so hard to figure it all out. There remains considerable debate in the psychology world about how much you should trust intuition. Some argue it's biased, shaped by past trauma and skewed memories. Others say it's a vital part of decision-making, especially when data is incomplete. The truth, as always, probably lives in the middle. Intuition is a tool, not a god. It's to be honored, not blindly obeyed. But here's the soul piece: when your intuition starts speaking, it often disrupts your plans. It might tell you to quit something that still looks good on paper. To reach out to someone you haven't spoken to in years. To move. To stay. To pause. To leap. And that guidance? It rarely makes perfect sense in the moment. But later, looking back, you often think, how did I know? Just a quirky twist. Some indigenous cultures refer to intuition not as a skill, but as a sense, like sight or hearing. It's not something you develop. It's something you remember. Something you unlearn the noise around. That's why kids are often incredibly intuitive. They haven't been trained out of listening to themselves yet. Your soul speaks through this sense. And once you start listening, it'll start sending more signals. In your body, tightness equals no. Warmth equals yes. Or maybe for you, it's the opposite. The point isn't to follow someone else's signs, it's to learn your own system. Your own yes. Your own no. That subtle knowing that lives below words. And you know what blocks it the fastest? Overthinking. You already knew that, didn't you? The spiral of analysis. The pressure to explain. The fear of making the wrong choice. All of that clouds the signal. Your soul doesn't speak in pros and cons lists. It speaks in feelings, hunches, sudden clarity. And here's the secret: when it's really your intuition, not your fear, it usually feels calm. Not urgent. Not dramatic. Just quiet certainty. Try this tonight. Think about a decision you've been wrestling with. Big or small. Instead of thinking about it, feel into it. Drop into your body. Notice what tightens. What loosens. What image or phrase or emotion floats up first. That's your clue. You might find this fascinating. The heart actually has its own mini brain. Over 40,000 neurons exist in the heart, and they communicate with your actual brain in a two-way conversation. It's called the heart-brain connection, and while it's still being studied, early research shows it plays a role in decision-making and emotional processing. Which might explain why your chest often knows before your head catches up. But intuition isn't just about decisions. It's also about direction. You know that subtle pull towards something new? That strange longing that won't leave you alone, even though it doesn't fit your life yet? That's intuition, too. It's not always here to answer a question. Sometimes, it's just here to say, look this way. And if you're patient enough to follow those breadcrumbs, without demanding the full map, you'll often find something remarkable, yourself. Because your intuition doesn't want to lead you to perfection. It wants to lead you to alignment. It doesn't care if your decision makes sense to anyone else. It only cares if it's true for you. So tonight, in this soft space between your questions and your answers, let your inner compass stretch a little. You don't have to act. You don't have to announce anything. Just listen. What's nudging you? What's calling quietly from behind the noise? That whisper? That flicker? That's your soul remembering the way forward. No logic required. Just trust. So your intuition has started whispering. Maybe it's not clear yet. Maybe it's not even words, just nudges, feelings, images that appear when you least expect them. You begin to follow the threads, not with certainty, but with curiosity. You take one small step, then another. And then? Nothing happens. You wait. You second guess. You wonder if you made a mistake. Because for all the inner work you've done, for all the surrender, the letting go, the clarity, you're still human. And humans? We really, really don't like to wait. Welcome to one of the most underestimated parts of the soul's journey, divine timing. The delays. The detours. The maddening stretches of nothingness between the inner decision and the outer result. It's frustrating. But it's also essential. Because growth doesn't always reward you immediately. It tests you. It stretches you. And sometimes, it makes you sit in the hallway between who you were and who you're becoming, a little longer than you planned. Psychology calls this space liminality, the transitional phase in rites of passage, where you've left your old identity but haven't yet integrated the new one. It's uncomfortable. It's unclear. But it's incredibly fertile. Think of it as the loading screen of your transformation. You're doing the work, but the system's still catching up. You might find this surprising. In ancient initiation rituals, the waiting phase was often the longest part. It was designed to teach patience, presence, and trust, not in outcome, but in process. In some cultures, initiates would sit in darkness for days, doing nothing, simply to develop the inner stillness required to hold their new identity. Today, we just call it anxiety, but let's be honest, it's the same spiritual muscle. How do I sit with not knowing, without trying to force a shortcut? A philosophical debate threads through this part of the journey. Is everything meant to happen at a specific time? Or are we just assigning meaning to coincidence because it comforts us? Some argue that the universe is random. Others believe in divine orchestration. But regardless of belief system, here's what's consistently true: timing matters. Because sometimes, you're ready, but the world isn't. And sometimes, the world is ready, but you're not. You've probably had that experience. Something you desperately wanted finally came, but it arrived before you were emotionally able to receive it. Or, it didn't arrive until you stopped obsessing over it, and suddenly, it felt right. That's not accident. That's alignment. Here's a little weird but true detail. Butterflies don't just sprout from the cocoon one fine day. Inside, their old body completely dissolves into a kind of genetic soup before reforming. If someone tries to help by cutting the cocoon early, the butterfly dies. The struggle to emerge is part of the development process. Same goes for you. If you try to rush your soul's unfolding, you miss the muscle-building phase. The patience. The clarity. The resilience. You arrive unprepared. So if things feel delayed right now, if you're screaming into the void, okay, universe, where's my sign? Remember this, your waiting is not wasted. It's teaching you how to hold what you asked for. Think of divine timing like tuning a radio. You might be playing the right song, but if the frequency's off, all you'll get is static. Time refines the frequency. It sharpens your reception. It teaches you what the real yes feels like. And during that waiting, your ego will throw a tantrum. It'll say, you're behind. It'll say, everyone else is moving forward. It'll say, you should have figured this out by now. But your soul will say, wait. Stay here. Watch what unfolds when you stop grasping. Because here's the irony, the more you cling, the longer things tend to delay. Not as punishment, but because desperation blocks clarity. You can't hear your guidance when you're shouting at the clock. You might find this interesting. In the world of horticulture, some seeds need cold stratification to germinate. That means they won't sprout unless they've spent time in the dark, frozen soil. Only after the cold do they crack open and grow. You're not stuck. You're being prepared. And during this time, you're invited to rest more. To notice more. To deepen your trust, not just in some cosmic force, but in your own rhythm. Because divine timing isn't always about the universe. Sometimes, it's just about your nervous system finally catching up to your new identity. Tonight, if your mind is looping, wondering when it will happen, why it hasn't yet, what you did wrong, pause. Ask yourself, what if this delay is protecting something sacred? What if there's wisdom in the waiting? What if this is exactly where you're meant to be, not because it's comfortable, but because it's true? That thing you long for? It's not gone. It's just still forming. You're not being denied, you're being calibrated. So take another breath. Let go of the mental deadline. Drop into trust. Not the easy, Pinterest quote kind. The gritty, soul-earned kind. Because even when nothing's happening, something always is. And now, after the quiet waiting, the ache of delay, the heavy stillness that somehow still held meaning, you begin to see it. Not all at once. Not in some fireworks moment. But in subtle flashes. Your eyes linger on something simple and beautiful. Your chest softens during a moment you used to dread. You laugh, genuinely, for the first time in weeks, and something inside you says, there you are. You've changed. And maybe the biggest shift of all? You can finally look back at the hardest chapters of your life, and feel something strange. Gratitude. It sneaks in when you're not expecting it. Not for the pain itself, no one's romanticizing suffering here, but for who you became because of it. For the courage it carved into your bones. For the layers it peeled back. For the way it made you drop everything that wasn't real. Gratitude for the unwanted chapters isn't about toxic positivity. It's not pretending something didn't hurt. It's not slapping a silver lining over a wound that still throbs. It's deeper than that. More honest. It's the kind of gratitude that whispers, that almost broke me. But it also built me. Psychologists call this retrospective meaning-making, the process of reinterpreting past events through the lens of who you are now. Research shows that people who can reflect on adversity with this kind of framing tend to have higher emotional resilience, stronger relationships, and, surprisingly, better physical health. Not because they deny the pain, but because they assign it meaning. Here's something you might not expect. In narrative therapy, clients are often invited to reauthor their stories. Not by changing facts, but by changing focus. Instead of centering on the wound, they begin to center on the response. On the moment they stood back up. On the strengths they didn't know they had until everything fell apart. That shift isn't just psychological, it's spiritual. It turns suffering into seed. But let's be real, not everything becomes beautiful. Not every loss transforms into light. There are things you may never understand. There are people you may never forgive. And yet, even then, something opens. Maybe it's your capacity to hold space for others. Maybe it's your ability to sense pain beneath someone else's smile. Maybe it's just your deepened presence, the way you move slower now, more tenderly, more aware of what matters. A long-standing question in philosophy explores whether suffering is necessary for wisdom. Do we need to break to see clearly? Or can growth happen gently, without the wreckage? It's an open debate. But ask anyone who's emerged from heartbreak, betrayal, illness, or loss, and you'll hear it. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I'm grateful for who I became. That's not justification. That's transformation. You might find this fascinating. In post-traumatic growth research, there's a phenomenon called benefit finding. It's when people identify specific positive outcomes from painful experiences. A deeper connection with loved ones. A stronger sense of self. A clearer vision of what they want. It doesn't erase the pain, it reframes it. You've likely done this without realizing. Think about a time in your life you once prayed to escape. A situation that felt unbearable. And now, look at who you are because of it. The boundaries you finally set. The authenticity you now demand. The self-respect you built from the rubble. Gratitude doesn't mean you enjoyed it. It means you integrated it. And here's a quirky little detail. Neuroscientists have found that practicing gratitude, not as a forced exercise, but as a genuine reflection, can literally rewire the brain. It strengthens pathways associated with joy, resilience, and emotional regulation. In other words, looking back with compassionate eyes makes it easier to move forward with an open heart. But here's the part people often skip. Gratitude doesn't always come quickly. Sometimes, it takes years. Sometimes, the lesson is delayed. Sometimes, you only understand in hindsight what was being healed. So if you're still in the thick of it, if the chapter you're living still feels jagged and unresolved, give it time. The gratitude will come. Maybe not for what happened, but for what awakened in you because of it. For the way you learned to listen. For the way you finally stopped abandoning yourself. For the way you began to love more honestly, more fully, more fiercely. Tonight, as you rest in this quiet space, try this gentle invitation. Think of one painful chapter. Not to relive it, but to meet it with new eyes. Ask yourself, what did I learn from that season? What part of me emerged stronger? What wisdom do I carry now, that I didn't then? Even if it's small. Even if it's subtle. Even if it's just, I survived. That's enough. Because your soul isn't keeping score, it's gathering substance. And gratitude? That's the moment you realize your pain didn't make you less whole. It made you more you. You grew through what you never asked for. You bloomed from soil you didn't plant yourself in. And somehow, miraculously, you're still here. And now, almost quietly, you feel it, something settling. Not because all the questions are answered. Not because the path is clear. But because somewhere along the way, you changed. You're no longer clawing your way through every challenge, trying to fix your soul like it's some broken machine. Instead, you're beginning to hold yourself like something precious. Like someone becoming. This is integration. The quiet after the storm. The part they don't make movies about because it's not dramatic. It's not loud. It doesn't have fireworks or epic montages. It's the part where you come home to yourself. Integration is what happens after the shift. After the realization, after the release, after the big moment of clarity that left you blinking in the dark. It's not glamorous. But it's where the real transformation roots itself. Psychologically speaking, integration refers to the process of bringing previously fragmented parts of yourself into a more cohesive whole. Carl Jung called it the individuation process, the merging of conscious and unconscious, shadow and light, mind and body. It's the long, slow return to inner coherence. You might find this unexpected. In some therapeutic traditions, especially somatic therapy and depth psychology, post-breakthrough care is considered more important than the breakthrough itself. Why? Because insights fade without structure. If you don't anchor the lesson, the nervous system reverts. The change doesn't last. So integration asks, how will you live what you've learned? Not perform it. Not preach it. Just quietly embody it. Maybe you start saying no with less guilt. Maybe you stop over-explaining your feelings. Maybe you begin moving slower, not because you have to, but because you want to. There remains considerable disagreement around how long integration takes. Some say it's a single moment of choice. Others believe it's a lifelong spiral, revisiting the same wounds with deeper awareness each time. The truth? It's probably both. Because soul growth isn't linear. It loops. It dips. It cycles. You'll revisit your old fears. You'll bump into familiar patterns. But instead of being dragged under, you'll recognize them. You'll say, "Oh, I know you." And then you'll make a different choice. That's integration. Just a quirky detail, in alchemical symbolism, the final stage of transformation is called rubedo, the reddening. It represents the completion of the spiritual work. Not as an arrival, but as the union of opposites. The integration of all that came before. The gold pulled from the fire. You're not becoming someone else. You're becoming more of who you truly are. The world may not notice. There's no badge, no big reveal. But your energy shifts. You speak differently. You listen more. You rest without apologizing. You trust yourself, even when you're scared. And that trust? That's the foundation of everything. You might find this surprising. People who experience major personal transformations often describe a quiet phase afterward. A kind of internal hibernation. They don't want to talk about it. They just want to live it. Psychologists call this the quiet zone, a liminal space where the psyche recalibrates. If you're there now, honor it. Let it be enough to simply breathe and exist and not always do something with your healing. Let the lessons land. Let the insights settle. Let yourself digest everything you've moved through. Tonight, as the world softens and your thoughts grow quieter, let this moment be your gentle exhale. You don't have to chase clarity anymore. You don't have to perform your strength. You don't have to prove your growth. You're allowed to simply be here, with all that you are and all that you're still becoming. You've walked through pain. You've questioned everything. You've unraveled, rebuilt, fallen again, and kept going. You've met fear and failure and silence and shadow. And somehow, through it all, you've become you. Not the old you. Not the imagined future you. But the version that holds all of it, the chaos and the calm, the hope and the hurt, the softness that comes only after the storm. This is the soul's journey. And you've walked it beautifully. Now, let's close gently. So just lie here now. Let your breath move like the tide, slow, rhythmic, steady. There's nothing left to figure out tonight. No questions to answer. No healing to finish. Everything you've done, everything you've felt, everything you've questioned, it all belongs. You're not running anymore. You're not unraveling. You're simply resting in the aftermath of your own becoming. And what a stunning thing that is, to pause, finally, and realize, I made it through. Even if the answers haven't all arrived. Even if the healing still feels unfinished. Still, you're here. More rooted. More awake. More honest. So let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw soften. Let your thoughts drift like clouds passing across the sky. You don't have to hold the weight anymore. You don't have to be anyone other than this version of you, the one who dared to keep going. The one who listened to the silence. The one who let pain become transformation. The one who chose presence over perfection. If there's a truth to carry from this journey, let it be this: you are not behind. You are not broken. You are becoming. Let that truth wrap around you like a blanket. Let it slow your pulse. Let it sink into the deepest corners of your awareness. And as you close your eyes, know this: you're exactly where you need to be. Not lost. Not late. Just unfolding. Softly. Gently. Truthfully. Just as your soul always intended.